Imagine being the only suspect in a crime you claim you didn't commit. Welcome to the perplexing world of Jeremy Bamber. This is not your everyday whodunit. It's a chilling tale that winds its way through a grim labyrinth of deceit, betrayal, and death. At the heart of this enigma is Jeremy Bamber, a man found guilty of a horrifying crime that claimed the lives of his adoptive parents, his beloved sister, and her innocent twin sons. But the horror doesn't stop with the brutality of the crime. The scene of the killings, the idyllic White House farm in Essex, was found to be meticulously manipulated, a diabolical ruse designed to paint a picture of murder-suicide. This was not a crime of passion or a moment of madness. It was cold, calculated, and chillingly precise. And yet, despite the weight of the evidence, despite the life sentence with no possibility of parole, Bamber continues to assert his innocence. His claims echo through the walls of his prison cell, reverberating with unsettling questions about truth, justice, and the very nature of guilt. Now let's dive into the chilling timeline of the Jeremy Bamber case. August 7, 1985. An ordinary night turned into a bloodbath. Picture this, a quiet farmhouse in Essex. The night was as ordinary as any other, but by dawn, it had morphed into a scene of unimaginable horror. The evening began with an unexpected call to the police. The voice on the other end was that of Jeremy Bamber, a young man who lived a seemingly ordinary life. In his call, Bamber painted a chilling picture. His sister, he claimed, had gone berserk. She was mentally unstable, he said, and he feared for the lives of his family. The police, alarmed by the urgency in Bamber's voice, rushed to the scene, bracing themselves for a confrontation with a disturbed individual. But what they discovered upon arrival was far worse than they could have anticipated. The peaceful farmhouse was transformed into a house of horrors. 5 bodies lay strewn around the property, each life silenced by the brutal force of a gunshot. Bamber's adoptive parents, Neville and June, were found lifeless in their own home. Their lives abruptly ended in the place they should have felt the safest. His sister Sheila and her innocent twin sons were also among the victims. The scene was a grim tableau of a family annihilated. The initial impression was that of a tragic murder-suicide, a family torn apart by mental illness. The finger was pointed at Sheila, a woman grappling with her mental health, caught in the throes of a deadly breakdown. But as the night wore on and the shock began to dissipate, questions started to arise. The scene felt off, too neatly arranged, almost as if someone had carefully orchestrated the carnage. The supposed murder weapon lay next to Sheila, but it seemed almost too convenient. But was it really the act of a distraught woman or a meticulously planned massacre? As dawn broke on the gruesome scene, the intricate web of deception began to unravel. The initial conclusion drawn by investigators was one of a tragic murder-suicide. Jeremy Bamber's sister, emotionally unstable and known to have a turbulent relationship with her parents, seemed the most likely culprit. However, inconsistencies in the scene and Bamber's own narrative began to surface, casting a shadow of doubt over this initial theory. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence that would turn the tide against Bamber. Hidden away in a gun cupboard, they discovered a silencer. This seemingly innocuous piece of equipment contradicted the narrative that Bamber had so carefully constructed. If the sister had indeed been the perpetrator of this heinous crime, how could she have replaced the silencer in the cupboard after shooting herself? Another damning piece of evidence emerged, the phone off the hook. Bamber had initially claimed to have received a distressing call from his father, informing him of his sister's violent rampage. However, the location of the phone off the hook was inconsistent with this claim. It was far removed from the bodies, in a spot that Bamber's father would not have been able to reach after being shot. This discrepancy further fueled the growing suspicion towards Bamber. As the investigation unfolded, the picture began to change. Bamber, the grieving son, was now a prime suspect. His demeanor, his inconsistent statements, and the mounting evidence against him painted a chilling picture of manipulation and deceit. The threads of his story were coming undone, revealing a far more sinister plot beneath. His adoptive parents, sister, and her innocent twin sons were victims of a horrific crime. But was it a crime of passion by a mentally disturbed family member, or a calculated act by a man driven by greed and devoid of empathy? The case was far from closed, as the evidence began to point to a chilling conclusion. The spotlight turned onto Bamber, as he stood in the dock, accused of the unthinkable. The trial of Jeremy Bamber was a spectacle that gripped the nation. Bamber, a charismatic young man, was charged with a crime that seemed beyond comprehension, the cold-blooded murder of his own family. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution presented a damning case against him. One of the key pieces of evidence was a silencer, found in a cupboard at the farmhouse. Forensic experts testified that the silencer had been fitted on the rifle used in the murders. This contradicted Bamber's initial story that his mentally unstable sister had committed the crime before turning the gun on herself. The experts argued that it would have been impossible for her to remove the silencer posthumously. Then came the revelation of a phone call. Bamber had initially claimed that his father had called him, panicked and afraid, saying that his sister had gone berserk with a gun. However, phone records showed no such call had been made. This was a major blow to Bamber's defense. His behavior after the murders also raised eyebrows. Bamber showed little grief or shock, seeming more interested in the financial gain from his parents' deaths. He even threw a party at the farmhouse just days after the tragedy. Witnesses, including his girlfriend at the time, testified to his lack of emotion and his plans to renovate the farmhouse. His own words were used against him as the prosecution painted a picture of a man motivated by greed and devoid of empathy. The trial was a tense and dramatic affair, with Bamber maintaining his innocence throughout, yet the mounting evidence against him was impossible to ignore. The jury delivered a guilty verdict. Bamber was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Despite the damning evidence, doubts persist. Is Jeremy Bamber truly guilty or a victim of a flawed justice system? This question continues to linger like a specter over the case. Bamber has consistently maintained his innocence, even from behind the cold steel bars of his cell. Over the course of almost 4 decades, he has launched numerous appeals, each one more desperate than the last. Yet each attempt has met with the same result: an unyielding wall of judicial denial. The court's verdict remains unshaken, its belief in Bamber's guilt seemingly as solid as the day the gavel first fell. But what fuels Bamber's unyielding claims of innocence? Is it a stubborn refusal to accept his fate, or is there, hidden beneath layers of evidence and testimonies, a kernel of truth? Could it be that Bamber is not the architect of the White House farm murders, but instead a scapegoat? In stark contrast to Bamber's persistent cries of innocence, stands his extended family, a unified front of certainty in his guilt. They remain convinced that the man they once knew as a family member is indeed the monster the court has labeled him to be. Their belief is unwavering, a stark reminder that the horrors of that fateful night in 1985 are not easily forgotten. Yet, despite the family's conviction and the court's verdict, the shadow of doubt continues to loom. The question remains, echoing in the halls of justice: is Jeremy Bamber a cold-blooded killer or a victim of a tragic miscarriage of justice? In the end, it seems the truth may forever be shrouded in mystery, buried deep within the heart of a man whose past is as troubled as his present. The Jeremy Bamber case remains one of the most chilling and controversial cases in British criminal history, a haunting tale of family, deceit, and murder.